Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Believe it or not, this is the second time I'm recording this video because the first time I didn't check my frame and let's just say half my chin was missing. So, take 2 of academic conferences and everything you need to know about them. Now, I've been asked about this for this video for a really long time, pretty much since I started making PhD academic themed videos back in, 2019. And the reason I haven't done it up until this point is because I hadn't been to one. So I didn't feel qualified to make this video. However, all that changed in June of this year when I gave a paper at the 2021 PCA Boston conference. I'm saying Boston because it was online. I'm basically going to talk you through what I did pre-conference, how I found the actual conference and presenting a paper, and then the kind of post-conference stuff that has come out from that conference. And hopefully this will be useful. Also, it is currently 29 degrees and my flat is boiling, so excuse the slightly sweaty appearance. Obviously the first step of presenting a paper at a conference is you need to write an abstract. And not only do you need to write an abstract, you need to find a conference that is relevant to your research and therefore both giving yourself a better chance to have your abstract accepted, but also it will then look more relevant on your CV going forward. Because if you go to a conference, for example, that is all about Gothic and Gothic horror, for me, if I gave a paper there, I would probably have to kind of twist my research topics so much to make it fit what they were looking for. And then if it got accepted and I presented at it, it's not adding that much to my CV because it's not necessarily in a field or an area I'm particularly interested in developing. It's not something academically that I'm looking to sort of transition into. And the networking opportunities potentially wouldn't be that useful either. So step 1 really is find a relevant conference to apply for, rather than just applying for any conference going. Now, the best way to do this is through Twitter or asking your supervisors. Your supervisors should in theory be experts in your field. They will know the conferences that are most relevant to your field. For example, I never heard of the PCA. I wouldn't have thought to apply for it. The Popular Culture Association, I'd have thought, whoa, that's way too, that's a big conference. But Amy was like, that's the best place for romance research. We have a whole dedicated section. Pretty much every romance scholar goes. It's a really good, fun, welcoming conference. So that's, I think, one of the first pre-conference things you have to do. Obviously, then once you've found a relevant conference and you've looked at what they're looking for example, the PCA that I applied for, the theme was scandal. So I looked at my research and I thought about ways that I could connect my existing research to the theme of scandal. Because the other thing that I think is super important about conferences is you don't want to give yourself extra work. Don't put in an abstract on a topic that you're not that familiar with or doesn't relate to your research, because otherwise you're just doubling your workload. It's not something that's going to feed back into your thesis, and ultimately it's a bit of a waste of your time. So for example, my abstract that I applied for the PCA for with the theme scandal, I linked it to romances and my data, and I will show you my abstract now. So this is the abstract I submitted for the PCA. As you can see, it isn't particularly long, only 243 words. That includes the references. That kind of gives you an idea. Abstracts don't tend to be long. And basically all this is kind of a little bit of background of what I'm going to be talking about, what my paper is adding to romance scholarship, and what I'm looking to explore. You know, this paper seeks to explore the legacy. And then kind of at the end, just sort of not a conclusion, but a sort of roundup of what my main argument might be. Now, the main thing to remember about abstracts is they can change. Just because this is your abstract doesn't mean your actual paper will then be super similar. I've seen that happen with very experienced academics, with PhD students. It's completely normal. But hopefully this gives you an idea. You want to be very direct. You're using the words I and things like that. So this isn't a piece of academic writing. This is very much almost a piece of marketing where you're trying to sell your paper and show it's important to the scholarship and why it's valuable for the conference. So you can probably see from the abstract I've just shown you that it was very linked to my research, and that made it A, a lot easier to write, and B, it made everything that I did for it relevant. So once my abstract got accepted, I kind of forgot about it for like 6 months, because you apply for these things way in advance. And then about a week before the conference, I was like, yes, I need to actually write that paper and put together a PowerPoint and do all the things for it. So that gives you an idea of how much time I spent writing my paper. Now, bear in mind, this was a 15-minute talk. It was on a topic I was very familiar with because it was the core of my research. So the main thing I had to do was just bring everything together. And that was surprisingly a straightforward process. I think I spent about 4 days on it. I wrote a script, which was about 3,000 words. Half of that was roughly on kind of the context of my data, talking about the romances, defining what queer romance meant to me, looking at the scandal and kind of the implications of that scandal. And then the other 1,500 words was me just explaining my data and trying to do that in a way that told a story and was engaging to people, rather than a dry way of just stating facts and figures. So I had about a 3,000 word script. Once I had the script, or the rough idea of what I wanted that script to be, I started working on the PowerPoint. Because I knew this was going to be a virtual conference, it felt important to me to have a PowerPoint that was engaging, that was interesting, because I don't know about you, but I think we've all got over Zoom meetings now, and most of the time people put them on in the background and they're not really engaged and they're not really listening. And I think if you're just talking, that is especially so. People like things to look at. Give them a reason to be looking at the screen and engaging with your research, rather than just hoping that they'll like the sound of your voice. So I made a PowerPoint, and I'll show you that here. And this is my presentation that I did. It's 11 slides, so it's not particularly long when you think that 2 of those are intro and outro slides. So really it's 9 slides of information. And as you can see, I just kept it very clean and simple. I used pictures to keep it interesting, but in general, I'm not putting a lot of text. This is probably my slide with the most text, and that's because I think when you quote things, it's kind of important to put the reference on there, and also sometimes the full quote, to be honest, because it helps people really key into what you're saying. And generally, your quotes will be some of the key things you're saying anyway. And then as you can see, it was my data. This was a very data-heavy presentation. So a lot of this was just trying to make these graphs as readable as possible. And I found the way to do that was just keep the backgrounds very simple and just have it very clear and try and use the colours to really highlight the differences and what I was trying to say about the data. That gives you an idea of roughly how long the PowerPoint was, how many slides I had. And I think I spent about a day putting together the PowerPoint, and then I spent a day putting together the graphs in the PowerPoint. So in total, about 4 days, and then on the 5th day, I just did a few practice runs, made sure it was the right length, and that was my paper prepped for the conference, so it was really easy. The other thing I did just a day or 2 before the actual conference started is I logged on to the virtual site. Now, obviously, if you're going to an in-person conference, you don't need to log on to the virtual site. You don't need to update your profile on the virtual site, add pictures, make sure your bio is relevant, all that jazz, because you'll be doing that sort of thing in person when people say, oh, what university are you at? Oh, what's your research on? And that kind of stuff. But a thing you can do, regardless of whether your conference is virtual or in person, is you can look at the schedule in advance and highlight any talks or papers or panels or whatever else it may be that is of interest to you, and just note down the times and put them in a separate calendar so that when you're at the conference, you're not scrambling around trying to find, oh, there's this talk, but this talk's at the same time. You've planned that all in advance. You know the things that are interesting to you. You know where the clashes are. And then on the day, you can then decide, actually, I think this is more exciting, or, oh, 2 people I've been hanging out with, another kind of PhD students or researchers I've connected with are going to this talk, so I'll go to that one, and then I'll get notes or watch the recording, if it's virtual, for the other one. So I found that really helpful to kind of plan out in advance what I was interested in. And it's not a strict schedule, for me it wasn't anyway, but it just meant that I felt calmer because I felt like I knew what I was doing, I knew what I was interested in, and I knew roughly how long I'd be committing to on each day. So that's all the pre-conference stuff that I did. Now, the actual conference, I really enjoyed the experience. I've realised it's one of my favourite parts, is talking to people about my research and explaining my research, and I found it not dissimilar to talking to you guys, because I was sitting in front of a laptop screen talking, and now I'm sitting in front of a camera talking. But I realise not everybody is as comfortable public speaking as I am, and I'm going to give a few tips to help you if you aren't. Now, bear in mind, I did a virtual one, so I can't really give tips for in-person, and I think you can probably find better people to give you advice for that. But for a virtual conference, I think some of the key things that to remember is practice moving your slides back and forward in Zoom, because it will be a little different. The software might change a bit. Have your script on a separate machine or printed out to the one that you're going to be sharing your screen for the PowerPoint with. I put my script on my phone, and that meant when I was controlling the PowerPoint via Zoom, I could scroll with my mouse to move the slides forward, and then I could read my script without having to sort of move about within the share screen and try and dual wield things. So I found that really useful. I think the other thing is, do practice it, but don't practice it too much. Run through it 1 or 2 times. You don't want to learn it by rote because you don't want to sound like you don't want to lose the engagement in your voice. You don't want it to start sounding dry because you've done it so many times, you're sort of just reading it very monotonously. But you want to read it a couple of times so that you're confident enough, and you kind of maybe, that sentence is a bit clunky, actually say it out loud, or okay, I don't like saying that word there, I mess it up, so I'll change that, or that's a very long sentence, or oh, that sentence is not what I thought it was. So it's really useful to practice out loud, practice moving the slides, and practice on the machine or the piece of paper, whatever it is that you're actually going to read your script from at the time. I think the other thing is, make sure you know, especially for a virtual one, how you're getting into the room, whether that be Zoom, Microsoft Teams. Download all that software a few days before. Test out the link if you're giving it in advance. It's really that simple. For example, with PCA, we had to log into their internal system, and then as presenters, we could join 20 minutes early. The Zoom link would appear for us. We click Zoom. Zoom was already downloaded, used it a bunch of times like everyone else, and then I knew the process because I'm so familiar with Zoom. If it had been Microsoft Teams, it might be a little different. I've only ever used Microsoft Teams once. I'm not as familiar with the software. I probably would have practiced a bit more and just made sure I knew how that was going to work. I think the only other thing to really think about during the conference is you're most likely going to have a Q&A section. This is not people trying to catch you out or trying to expose your research. My experience at my conference that I went to is everyone was genuinely interested in my research. They were just asking questions because they thought of them. There was no trying to quiz me or make me look like a fool. If anything, it was a really encouraging, supporting environment. And so many people had so many lovely things to say about my data and really good, engaging questions. And I think the other thing that's important to remember when you're answering those questions is try and be a bit personal. You're talking to people, not academics. Try and remember their names of who asked the question. Try and sort of answer it like you would a human rather than answering it as this is what I would say in an essay. Keep it a little bit informal. Not unprofessional, but not so formal that you're a bit off-putting, if you can. Obviously, if your personality is more formal maybe than mine is, you've got to be authentic to yourself. But I would say try and connect with people as people rather than trying to impress people as an academic. I think that will get you further. So that's pretty much what happened at the conference. It was pretty straightforward. Once I'd given my paper, which was on the 3rd day, I relaxed a lot more. It was a 5-day conference. And I pretty much just watched the things I was interested in. Some of them clashed. So as I said, I watched the recordings, typically the day after. And it felt very seamless. The most annoying thing really was the fact, because it was an American conference, I had to get up, it started at 4 and it ended at like midnight. So the times were sometimes a bit annoying, but it worked out, and I'm a night owl, so it wasn't terrible. And people in Australia had it way worse, so I can't complain too much. Now, the post-conference things that I'm going to end with were things I didn't really think about when I applied to a conference and I wasn't really expecting. And obviously these won't be the experience everyone has post-conference, but certainly at the PCA and the romance section, it's very common for some of the papers to get turned into journal articles for the Journal of Popular Romance Studies. And obviously that is a case of polishing up your paper, extending it a little bit, researching it a bit heavier, and you're basically taking it from being roughly a 3,000 word not informal, but conversational paper to a 5,000 word, I think it's 5,000 to 10,000 word actually for the Journal of Popular Romance Studies, academic journal article, fundamentally. But that is something I'm going to be doing. The deadline isn't until December, so I've got time, so I'm not focused on it now, but it's in the background, and I'm thinking how I could change my paper into a journal article. And that's another good reason to have a script, because you've already got a starting point. The other thing is I came out of it with potential networks and future collaborations from people researching queer romances that I didn't know about before. And I think that's a really good thing about conferences, is it does give you a chance to meet other people in your field from countries you aren't familiar with or don't have an opportunity to go to or whatever. I think that's about it. If you have any questions, or if there's anything you feel I haven't answered, feel free to leave a comment down below or message me on Instagram at PhD Life with Lucy. And as always, you know what you're doing. I'm not going to say it, but I'll see you next Sunday. Bye.